All right, everybody, we're back. In this video, we are going to segue from working on routing to working on our form. But the first thing we're going to do is, this is the segue part. We are going to make sure that the same form opens when we click this button as when we click this button, which currently it doesn't. So to do that, this is your first task. Figure out how to do that. And just a reminder, you have done something very similar before, and it involves passing props. So give that a try and then unpause the video. So the very similar thing I was talking about, well, we have this handler and we set an on-click listener. And that's basically all we need to do. So like the end thing that we need to do is set a click listener on this button. To be able to do that, we need to pass this in from a previous component. While I'm here, I'm going to put a to-do, set up the item modal in this component. Or let me phrase it like this: make the item modal open on the profile route. And it's going to be very similar to what we're doing here. So we are destructuring it, but we need to get the prop all the way to this component. And remember what the chain is here, where we have our app component, then we have our profile component, then we have the subcomponents of the profile. We need to pass it from app to profile, and then from profile to close section. I believe it is, let's see, here we go. This is what the function is called. I'm just going to call it the same thing throughout. So I'll copy this, paste it inside the profile component, paste it here as a prop for the close section component, destructure it in the closed section component, and that should be it. Like, I believe that will be everything, and now it will open. Yep, see? Pretty easy. So remember, you have this task as homework. Next, now it's time to make the form work, to make it submittable. Let's go back to the project instructions, which we haven't referred to in a little while. So this first part, this is something that might seem, it's a little hard to wrap your head around, but this example, I think, definitely helps it. So you're going to create an AddItemModal component, and it'll have some code here. We'll work on that. It will return, the JSX it'll return will have the modal with form component that you already made as its outermost element. And then inside it, it's going to have the contents of the form. And this will be we'll use the same format for any form modal that we create. Now, what will really help is to refer back to how we have it currently. It's exactly what we're looking for here. It's the modal with form, and then inside it, the contents of the form. So that's exactly what we have. Basically, we just need to copy and paste all of this and put it inside our new AddItemModal component. And then we'll render the AddItemModal component instead. So I'm cutting it. It's on my clipboard. and going a little backwards, but we can follow the linting errors backwards. So in order to define AddItemModal, we need to create a file. We don't need a CSS file in this case. Oh, but I do want to still put it in a subfolder to keep the same structure. But we won't need a CSS file because the CSS is just whatever we've already written for modal with form. Create the shell of our function. And inside it, we put parentheses and then just paste what I have on the clipboard. Follow the linting errors. AddItemModal is declared, but its value is never read. Modal with form is not defined. ActiveModal is not defined. There are 3 steps you need to take to get rid of those errors. Try to make those 3 steps. And basically, you can get the errors to go away just in this file. You don't have to do anything outside of this file. All right, so first, we need to use this AddItemModal component. If you declare something and don't read its value, then you get that flag. And in the case of components, typically what we do with them to read them is we export them. And we'll use them in another component. Modal with form is not defined. Well, in that case, we just need to import it. That's how we typically will define or declare the component inside a file. We have to import it in from its own file. And finally here, ActiveModal is not defined. Well, we would need to pass it as a prop because that's how it's going to have to be passed. That's how it's getting passed to modal with form as a prop. So we'll need to pass it in as a prop. Active modal from app.js more specifically. Now, we've got red marks in app.jsx, and that's because this is still not defined. We can define it by importing it. Import AddItemModal. And we're getting these squiggles, declared but not read. So what do we have to do? Do we have to read it somewhere in this file? The answer is no. We don't need to. We're not importing that into this into app.jsx anymore. And you can think of it it's kind of analogous to when you were working with classes and you had a pop-up component that was a parent component and a pop-up with form component and a pop-up with form component. The pop-up with form component is what you actually used in your index.js file. The pop-up class was just in the background. You never actually made instances of it. And that's kind of what's going on here. You'll have a bunch of different instances of modal components, and they'll all look very similar to this, but with different details and different children. Now, what would we expect to happen if we tried to open this? Try to predict that. Try to look through the code and see if you can predict what will happen. And my prediction is that we'll start here. It's not going to open, and maybe an error will appear in the console. I'm not certain about that. Okay, It did not open, and there's no error. So our next task is to make it open. To make it open, it needs to have, well, it needs to have whatever props it needs to open. So it needs this prop, right? We need to pass it is open. In fact, we need to move this entire thing here out to app.jsx, because this is how we tell our component when it should be open or not. Then we would just need to pass the is open prop along to modal with form. Remember, modal with form is what actually will make the modal visible. So it's these three steps. We need to pass it from app to AddItemModal, pass it from AddItemModal to modal with form, and then modal with form uses it to make the modal visible. We don't need this anymore because we moved that state or kept that state in the bigger component in the app component. What about these? Should we move these to app? I'm going to say no. These are kind of specific to our AddItemModal component. And we'll have a different title, different button text and all if we have, like, say, a login modal. But it can stay inside our AddItemModal component. Keeps this a little bit cleaner. Now, go here, refresh, and it opens. And go to the profile and check, and it opens. So very good. We're back to where we were, right? You might have more props to deal with. In fact, you would. Like there's probably a close modal prop that you have. Try to think about what you should do with that. It's similar to what we've already done. Okay, so now we can move on to submission. Let's go back here. We've got the basic component in place. Control the form with the useForm hook. Create a hook file with the useForm hook we showed in that lesson. Import it and use it. Okay. To use it, well, so let's go to that lesson. Lesson here, custom hooks, useForm. There are many different ways that you could do this. And in fact, in general, you probably wouldn't write a custom hook like this in production. You might use one of the pre-written things, but you got to learn stuff somehow. So here we have, this is the basic component. And let me just copy it and I will explain how it works. So create a src/hooks/useForm.js file. And it should just be JS, not JSX. UseForm accepts an object of default values as an argument. It wouldn't necessarily need to be an object. Well, it sort of would, because values is intended to be an object. You usually have multiple values. So yeah, this would need to be an object. We have our state, which is just one object with, it's going to be one field per input name. So we've got input name weather, input name name. I didn't even put a name on that. They'll all need a name attribute. Name equals name. So they all need a name attribute. The inputs would all have the same name. So name is weather because they're a group, the radio inputs. What we would need to do is pass a default values array that has a name property, a weather property, and also one for the other input type, which I'm still gonna leave up to you to manage by analogy with what we're doing with all of this. The change handler. This is what we will use as the onChange handler for all of these um, inputs. OnChange equals, and it's going to be this handle change function. Um, the way it works is the event target. This is going to be the actual input element that was changed. Value is going to be its value. Name is going to be its name attributes value. We update the values object by just copying the existing properties and then just overwriting the property that corresponds to the current input with the new value. So every key that's pressed will just update the object. So there's the explanation. Try to implement it. Try to set it up. Follow the patterns shown in that lesson, and then I will show you how. So with a hook, a custom hook, you will import it, use form, using curly braces because it is not export default. Export default would make perfect sense in this case if we have just a single hook in the file, but you can do it either way. To use a custom hook, you just call it. And usually you will make use of the return values. That's typically how that would work. So to destructure it, we need to use the exact names of the properties. I don't even think we need the set values function in this case, so I'm going to leave it empty. Use form. Okay, so we have the values and we have the handle change function. For default values, remember the object needs to have properties that correspond to the name attributes of the input elements. So it would have to be like this. The default value for the weather field, let's go back here. I think what we can do is we can set it to hot, and that should make this appear by default. Once we have this set up, it's not going to do anything yet. Values. The values in this object get used with the as the value property of the corresponding input. So we just do values.name because remember, name is the name of the input. And just to make sure it's working, let's change the default value to ASDF and make sure that it appears. Ta-da! But hot is not selected because we haven't set up the set it up yet. Now, here's a trick here. We can't just set the value to like you might try to do this, and believe me, I've done this. Oops. Values dot weather, and then you do the same thing everywhere else, right? And you think, okay, that'll work. It will not work because basically values dot weather starts as hot. It'll never change. It'll just never change if the value is always tied to this value. So what we need to do in the case of radio inputs and checkbox inputs, multiple checkbox inputs would be similar, is we need to make use of the checked property and check if values dot weather equals hot. I think that'll do. So what this will do is if values.weather is hot, this particular button, the first one, is going to be checked. And you see it's working there. And then we can do the same thing, but with the corresponding weather types. Okay, refresh, open, defaults look good. Can't change it. Why can't we change it? Because I neglected to use the handle change function, and our linter is hinting at that for us. So we use the onChange handler, which we used with the toggle switch component. And we just use this same handle change function for all of our inputs. And because it's set up to handle everything. Then we can go back to here and refresh the page again. And I can type stuff and I can select different things.